12:38 in the afternoon. August 14, 2003. A software process at First Energy's control center in Akron, Ohio hangs on an unhandled exception. The alarm system goes silent. Nobody notices. 3.5 hours later, 55 million people across 8 U.S. states and Ontario lose power in under 9 minutes. It is the largest blackout in North American history. The official report would identify a tree branch in Ohio as the cause. That's the wrong answer. The tree branch tripped a transmission line. That's true. But transmission lines trip every day across North America. The grid is designed for single contingencies. What failed in 2003 wasn't a power line. What failed was the system that was supposed to tell operators the power line had tripped. By the time anyone knew the grid was stressed, it was already too late. The reliability standard that governs the American grid is called N-1 contingency. N is the number of elements in your system: lines, transformers, generators. N-1 means your system must survive the loss of any single element. If a line trips, the remaining lines absorb the load. The grid keeps running. First Energy's system in northern Ohio was N-1 compliant on paper. What happened on August 14th was N-2, then N-3, then N-4. 345 kilovolt transmission lines went down in sequence. Each one made the next more likely. At 12:38 p.m., a race condition bug in First Energy's energy management software caused a server process to hang. The Energy Management System, the EMS, monitors the real-time state of the grid and alerts operators when something is wrong. When the primary server hung, the system should have failed over to a backup. The backup didn't pick up. The alarm displays went stale. Operators saw frozen data. They had no way to know the display was frozen because the system itself appeared normal. At 2:02 p.m., the Chamberlain-Harding 345 kV line in northern Ohio touches a tree and trips. Under normal circumstances, an alarm would have sounded within seconds. No alarm sounded. At 2:25, a second 345 kV line, Stuart, Atlanta, trips. Still no alarm. At 3:05, a third line goes. The operators in First Energy's control room are watching frozen screens that show everything is fine. The grid underneath them is quietly overloading. Here is what happens when a high-voltage transmission line trips under load. The power flowing on that line doesn't disappear. It redistributes instantly across every parallel path in the network. The remaining lines absorb the extra flow. If those lines are already close to their thermal limit, they start to overheat. Overhead lines sag as they heat up. If a line sags far enough to contact a tree, it trips, and the process repeats on the next line. This is a cascade. Each failure increases the probability of the next failure. Without intervention, there is only one outcome. The Eastern Interconnection, the grid covering the U.S. east of the Rockies and most of Canada, is one synchronous machine. Every generator in it runs at exactly 60 Hz. Constantly. When generation and load fall out of balance, frequency starts to drift. Protection relays, automatic switches on every transmission line and generator, are designed to operate when currents or voltages fall outside safe ranges. They don't think. They respond to electrical quantities. As the Ohio cascade intensified, the imbalance spread across the interconnection. Generators tried to compensate. Currents on distant transmission lines rose, and relays throughout the system began to respond, exactly as designed. At 4:39 p.m., the cascade locked in. What followed took 9 minutes. 4:39, high-voltage lines in northern Ohio begin tripping in rapid sequence. 4:11:57, the Cleveland-Akron area loses voltage. Generators trip offline automatically to protect themselves. 4:13, the cascade crosses into Michigan. By 4:13, operators in New York and Ontario are watching their system frequency drop. They don't know why. At 4:13:20, New York separates from the eastern grid. The separation saves New York. Everything west of that boundary, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ontario, parts of New England, goes dark. For 19 p.m., 61,800 megawatts of generation gone. The final NERC report identified 46 technical findings. The top finding wasn't about trees. It was about situational awareness. At 2:02 p.m., when the first 345 kV line tripped, First Energy had more than 2 hours to respond before the cascade became unstoppable. They had switching devices they could have opened, generators they could have called on, neighboring utilities they could have coordinated with. They had the tools. They had the training. They just didn't know they needed to use them. The 2003 blackout was not a failure of the power system. It was a failure of the information system that was supposed to protect it. Before 2003, NERC reliability standards were voluntary. Utilities could review them, consider them, and ignore them. There were no federal penalties. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 changed that. It gave FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, authority to make reliability standards mandatory and enforceable with financial penalties. For the first time, violating a grid reliability standard could result in a fine. First Energy paid $3.35 million in fines related to the 2003 outage. That number is small relative to $6 billion in damage. But the accountability structure changed permanently. The specific failure, a software bug that silenced the alarms, led directly to new monitoring requirements. NERC's IRO and top reliability standards now require operators to maintain real-time situational awareness and coordinate with neighboring utilities when contingencies occur. Alarm systems and their backups are now tested and certified. The failure mode that brought down the Eastern Grid on August 14, 2003 is specifically prohibited. So did we fix it? Mostly. But the grid that exists today is not the grid that existed in 2003. And some of what made 2003 survivable, barely, is getting thinner every year. The Eastern Grid survived 2003 because of physical inertia, not bureaucratic inertia, rotational inertia. Every synchronous generator, every coal plant, gas turbine, and nuclear reactor has a massive spinning rotor connected to the grid. When frequency starts to drop, those rotors slow down slightly and automatically inject stored kinetic energy into the system. It happens in milliseconds. No software, no control room decision, no communication. It is physics. That inertia bought time during the 2003 cascade. Seconds in which protection systems could operate and the grid could find a stable point. Solar panels don't have rotors. Most wind turbines are decoupled from grid frequency by power electronics. Inverter-based resources don't provide inertia by default. Inverter-based resources, solar, wind, most battery storage, are now a large and rapidly growing fraction of the U.S. generation fleet. The NERC 2026 Long-Term Reliability Assessment Project's summer peak demand could surge 224 gigawatts. That is 69% more than projected just 1 year ago. More load, less inertia, grid dynamics that move faster than the protection systems designed for 2003. FERC issued show cause orders to all 6 U.S. grid operators last week. The NERC president publicly called the current reliability situation a 5-alarm fire. The mandatory standards that came out of 2003 are real. Real-time monitoring is required. Coordination protocols exist. But the physical characteristics of the grid are shifting in ways that no standard can fix by itself. A 2003-style cascade today would move faster. The tree branch is still the tree branch. What makes a power system reliable isn't the absence of faults. Faults happen. It is the ability to see them in time to respond. In 2003, the system for seeing failed first. The cascade followed automatically. The next large-scale failure will start somewhere different and look different. But the pattern will be the same. Something compounding faster than anyone expected in a system that didn't know it was already stressed. The inverter question, what the loss of synchronous inertia actually means for grid stability and what FERC is trying to do about it, is the subject of the next video. Link is up there.